Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. Today, we're going to talk about writing the introduction. This is our second video in the series where we look at a question about ghosts and spirits and the supernatural.
This guy's excited today.
I am, and now we're going to talk about how do we put all this together into a really good introduction and have our handshake with our reader.
Okay, Mr. Jaws, for the sake of those who weren't with us last video, let's go ahead and read the question. The question for today reads as follows. How and to what effect do two works of literature you have studied utilize ghosts, spirits, or the supernatural? Break it down, Giles. What do we need to think about?
All right, we're of course thinking about how and to what effect. We're thinking about, again, the why, what's the effect of this? And we're thinking about ghosts, spirits, or the supernatural. So it invites us to make some choices. And we're thinking about these supernatural and these ghosts and what they might convey.
Yeah, we ended up with Hamlet and Sing Unburied Sing because we teach these texts, we love these texts, and they've got some pretty cool ghosts, right?
Yeah, I think, again, there's so many great texts for paper two. So again, our rudimentary outline very briefly was looking at the circumstances of the death of the ghosts, thinking about the interaction with the characters was our second comparative point.
Our third comparative point, we were thinking about how the ghosts in both of these works are sort of stuck in limbo. And then our final comparative point, Mr. Giles, we're thinking about the end of both works and how, Hamlet's ghost kind of leads to stability and liberation for Denmark, while Ritchie's ghost kind of implies that there will be further discrimination and racism in the world of Sing Unburied Sing. Is that correct?
That's right.
Now, I would like to say, I noticed you have four different comparative points, which leads me to believe that at some point in time during the paper, you might have to collapse some of those ideas.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
No, I think it's a really good point. This is a very ambitious outline. Again, this was just these were points of comparison and ideas. And you're right. I might have to collapse them and think. And the way that I would do that, just to tell you, is I would take those last comparative points about the endings, and I would incorporate those into my conclusion.
Yeah, folks, you got to keep your eye on the clock. Yeah, you could, but just remember to keep your eye on the clock because if you get short of time, you have to do exactly what Mr. Giles said: is take some of those final points and kind of weave those into the conclusion. Okay.
But I'm just going to say one thing
Please
is
do.
that I'm going to think about I've got an hour and 20 minutes to write. I'm going to actually budget my time and say, all right, that means I need to write 10 minutes per paragraph. I do 10 minutes per paragraph. I maybe can accomplish that.
That's something we do with our students all the time. The 10-minute paragraph. Teachers and students, we recommend you practice this as well. Giles, go ahead and read aloud the thesis that we arrived at, and we'll talk about that.
Okay. The nature of ghosts and the circumstances of their deaths are vastly different in these two works, since one revolves around racial injustice of a large group of people, and the other is about the unjust murder of one solitary king. However, both Ward and Shakespeare use the appearance of these ghosts to represent injustice, corruption, and instability, and remind the characters to remember and honor their memories, and perhaps correct the mistakes of the past.
Okay, so it looks like you're going to once again focus on the similarities between these two works. Is that correct? And you want to think about injustice, corruption, and instability and how these ghosts sort of link to memories of the past. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What's the difference that you want to look at there?
They're kind of there to remind the characters in the text to remember them, right? And they're constantly there to remind them. Yeah, but I'm thinking about the nature of the ghosts being different, and I'm thinking about the circumstances surrounding their deaths to be quite different, right? They're different.
Giles, I want to read this paper. Are you going to write this paper?
I wrote some of it. I've written all of it.
Well, let's talk about the introduction.
But I've written it in my head.
Okay, I like that. We do that off. We got lots of papers in our mind, right? Let's talk about the components of a good introduction, and then we'll reveal the introduction for this particular paper. A good introduction should have...
It should have a hook, and I know this is controversial. Some teachers are want you to get right to the point. I like a hook that actually shows the student thinking about the topic briefly. Again, brief thinking about the topic is not wasted time.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have a little bit of voice in your paper. Examiners are reading stacks of hundreds of these. A little voice goes a long way, Giles. The next thing you have to have in your introduction is a brief summary of the two works with an eye on the topic. What does that mean, an eye on the topic?
Well, we're not just having a stock sentence that summarizes the text. We're actually thinking about ghosts in this case. Like, how are the ghosts incorporated into the text? So I think it's important to do that.
Yeah. Lastly, we want to have a clear comparative thesis statement that has rich ideas as well as the words of the guiding question. Very important to have all three of these aspects in your thesis statement.
Okay, so let's take a look at this introduction and see what the student did.
Go ahead, pal. You wrote it. You read it.
Okay, here we go. Generational trauma refers to the emotional and physical pain endured by early ancestors being passed on and inherited by later generations. This trauma can surface and remind us of injustices and discrimination that occurred in the past. This trauma also deeply affects one's attitude and actions in the present. This concept is clearly expressed in Jesmyn Ward's powerful 2017 novel, Sing and Buried Sing, where a southern Mississippi family must deal with not one, but two ghosts of the past. Two ghosts, Richie and Given, visit young Jojo and his mother, Leonie, respectively, as they navigate their way through the novel, centered around the husband Michael's release from Parchman Prison. Both Richie and Given are clear reminders of the pain and suffering inflicted on many young African Americans. Similarly, Shakespeare's Hamlet features a prominent ghost of King Hamlet, but this time Hamlet's appearance is a clear sign of fratricide and betrayal and a harbinger of chaos and instability in Denmark. The nature of the ghost and the circumstances of their deaths are vastly different in these two works, as one revolves around racial injustice of a large group of people and the other is about the unjust murder of one solitary king. However, both Ward and Shakespeare use the appearance of these ghosts to represent injustice and instability and remind the characters to remember and honor their memory and perhaps correct the mistakes of the past.
Mr. Giles, that is a fantastic introduction. I really, really enjoy it. You've done the 3 steps. You've kind of linked us into the topic. You've introduced the works with the eye on the topic, and then you end with that good comparative thesis. Talk about some of the things you were thinking about as a writer when you crafted this piece.
Well, I think this topic of generational trauma has been on my mind in reading Sing and Buried Sing. I think this is really what Sing and Buried Sing is about. But then I'm thinking like that is directly connected to the ghosts. You know, I was thinking about this idea of the ghosts of the past visiting people in the present. That's about like ancestors coming back and saying, hey, I've suffered.
Yeah, I have suffered. And it's talking about that idea of injustice and discrimination, which are core ideas of the text. Again, when you answer your paper 2 question, you don't want to be dancing around on the periphery. You want to think about what are the author's key messages of the text and how can I leverage those in my argument.
So those were on my mind. And then I'm thinking about, okay, I'm going to bridge the hook and lead to my summary. So I'm thinking about, okay, how are the ghosts, how do they appear, how are they used? And then again, the orange is kind of me just trying to summarize as briefly as I could what this text is about, keeping in mind that many examiners haven't read Sing and Buried Sing. So I need to explain where is this text taking place, what's actually the principal plot.
But folks, do not get into a long summary. We're talking like 1 sentence, maybe 2 if you need to, Mr. Giles, right? But we're talking a really brief summary as Giles has done here. We do the same thing for Hamlet, and you talk about the idea of fratricide and the betrayal and a harbinger of chaos. So we've introduced both texts, and then we go right to the thesis, okay? I notice again in the thesis we have the language of the guiding question, we have rich ideas, and we have comparative phrasing. Mr. Giles, to me, it looks like we have all the elements of an introduction.
Hopefully. Yeah, and I think, again, we're just trying to have that strong handshake to say, I understand the question, I've interpreted the question, and now I have an argument of what I want to say. So again, this is so critical. We need to make sure we establish ourselves as writers and thinkers, and that this is the direction our paper is going to be headed.
Yeah, folks, in closing, remember, we don't have a half hour, 45 minutes to plan this thing. We have to be quick, we have to be judicious in our choices, we have to break down the language of the question that we choose, we have to think about wearing our comparative hat, we have to come up with a rudimentary outline, then we take those ideas of the rudimentary outline, look for relationships, and craft that comparative thesis statement. If you can do that, you too will have success on your Paper 1 introduction. That's what we have for today, folks. Stay with the channel. What's next, Giles? What do we have next?
We're going to take a look at this same question and this same thesis and how it looks in the body paragraph and get on those comparative hats.
Fantastic. See you in the next video, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.